time for Phreology Friday. I am Derrick Day, and he is.
I am Aaron Tomlinson. Good to be with you, Derrick, once again. Looking forward to this all week long.
Absolutely, man. Good to be with you. Good to see your smiling face after a week.
Thank
I think we had actually a good show last week.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that the live audience wasn't that big, but based on just the two Facebook pages, it's like about 1,500 views. I mean, it was like pretty good.
That's great.
So, apparently, it resonated with some folks, and that's what we like to do. We like to poke the bear, hit the buttons, or just otherwise, make people think.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So with that being said, man, what is in your glass tonight?
Well, I am drinking a red blend, Menage a Trois red blend. So yeah.
So I'm cheating tonight. I'm having an old fashioned. It's a on the rocks cocktail.
Yeah.
So it's already made. It's got some Knob Creek Kentucky straight bourbon in it, and the rest of the stuff that goes into an old fashioned. I had an idea for a drink, and I'm going to do this maybe next week, right? That a take on the mules. We like to drink mules on this show, and so I had this one. I wanted to call it like a red mule. And so instead of ginger ale or ginger beer, use a Red Bull and add a little lime juice to that, and see what happens.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah, so I could be, crashing and rising at the same time.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We will see. So I think that I kind of set the topic for tonight. So I'll go ahead and tee it up but I think this is going to be good because I want to talk about decolonizing spirituality. Decolonizing spirituality. And I think that this is important because, and I'm, how can I say this? Spoiler alert. I'm going to throw a bone to my Christian friends. I'm not going to say what it is right now, but I'm going to throw you a bone. I mean, and understand this, like, I really detest religion personally, but I get that there are people that they are still immersed in religion for whatever reason. And what I'm going to tell you later on in the show, this is actually going to help you. This is going, tell them, Aaron, it's going to benefit them.
It is definitely going to benefit them.
It is going to benefit them.
Yeah. I had a little smirk there, but I didn't mean to. I'm serious. I had a thought run through my brain that had nothing to do with what was coming out of my mouth.
But yeah, the big thing is, I think that one of the downsides of spirituality, and by extension religion, one of the bad raps that it gets is that our spirituality is largely colored by or influenced by our cultural paradigms. And so what I'm hoping to do tonight is to explain why that is and help people decouple their spirituality from their culture. Because once you do this, because the whole objective of this show, we call it Phreology Friday, because it's all about being free from theology, or having a free theology where you're not bound by any box. Okay, so we were talking about thinking outside the box last week, and this is sort of an extension of that. But if you can decouple your cultural lens from your spirituality will experience a newfound freedom that you've never experienced before. And that is the part that's exciting to me. So with that, Aaron, I'm going to kick it over to you.
My mind's all over the place with this stuff. This is where my mind went, and I don't know why. And I'm just going to throw it out there
because throw it out there, man.
Topic to get our arms around. But I was just thinking, I really believe in reincarnation, past lives and future lives. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not trying to argue with anybody or prove anything or, say you have to believe in this. But I personally believe that I've lived past lives, that I'll live future lives.
Mhm.
And you said that, about the freedom that you get or that you can experience by decoupling some of your cultural conditioning, let's say, from your spiritual path. And I thought, I wonder how many different incarnations I've had in different cultures, different gender. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure I've been a woman many times in past lives.
Yeah.
And I am sure that I've incarnated as part of different cultures, right?
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing to introduce, to sort of outframe the whole, what do you do with prejudice and racial issues and stuff like that? If you step back from it and say, I'm sure at some point in time, I was part of an indigenous people group. I'm sure at some point in time, my skin was brown, my skin was black, my skin was yellow, my skin was white, that my soul has experienced all those various iterations of itself.
Sure.
And I just had never really even thought about that until you said that, made that statement. And I thought, wow. Because I do think that spirituality becomes enculturated, and sometimes that's good. I think sometimes that's good, and I think sometimes it's very, very negative, particularly when a people group is taken over. So then I'll hit the colonization part of it, right?
Yep.
So not just we tend to think of colonization in terms of when we talk about the church and we talk about Christianity, we tend to think of it only in terms of Europeans invading foreign lands and stripping indigenous people of their traditions and their culture and things like that. And we tend to have color front and center with that. So in other words, Africa, India, the United States, and all these various different places. But the truth is, before they invaded any of those areas, they were invading the barbarians, right? So you can specifically, I'll speak to my culture. Probably most of my ancestors originate from somewhere around the UK, probably Vikings at some point, right? And one of the things that's really interesting to me, and I did a live video on this probably 3 or 4 years ago, but it's interesting to me how Christianity specifically, and I'm not saying other religions haven't done this, I only know Christianity because that's the one I've studied for most of my life, right? But they, from its very origins, demonized the culture around them and used the imagery of that culture to talk about Satan and demons and evil and things like that. So, for example, Justin Martyr, kind of the first one in history that we know of that did this, took the pagan gods of the Romans and said, these are all demon gods. To worship these gods is to worship demons, right?
Yep.
But then later on, this whole idea of the devil with the goat's head and the horns and all of that probably comes from Celtic traditions and the horn god that they worshipped, which was a blending and balancing of all things, spiritual, humanity, nature. So this is something that would have been very venerated, that would have been potentially an entity that was prayed to. And when Rome invaded that part of Europe, they demonized that god in particular to such a level that we still think of the devil as having a tail and cloven hooves and horns and things like that. So taking a sacred image and defiling it and flipping it on its head as a way of stealing culture and stealing spirituality from a culture and colonizing it. So that's kind of my introductory thoughts on this.
Well, and here's the thing. I want to, like I said, I'm going to throw some bones. So now one of the bones I'm going to throw are to my white friends, people of European descent. Because whenever we start talking about colonization, it invariably goes back to Europeans. But colonization happened in many other parts of the world, in many other cultures. for example, the Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at Vietnam, Korea, the Philippines, Malaysia, they all celebrate Chinese New Year.
Mm.
And there is a heavy influence of Chinese culture in these societies. Why? Because China was a colonizer. And I learned something just this week, that the Taj Mahal was built as a burial shrine to the wife of a Shah,
Hmm.
a Persian type king, or that archetype.
Mm-hmm.
And the Hindu culture has sought to purge that Persian influence out of the country, and that sets up the dissension between India and Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
because the Pakistani people harken back to that Persian archetype. And here's the other thing too, is that whenever you start talking about colonization, you can't separate that from nationalism.
Right.
That whenever there is nationalism, in other words, I'm going to plant my flag and I'm going to impose my culture on someone else. So you had that with the Europeans, for sure, with the Spanish, with the Portuguese, with the English, with the Dutch, right? You had that. But you had that among Native Americans. For example, the Cherokee influence over the Sioux and other indigenous tribes. You had this with indigenous tribes in Australia. You had this with like, for example, the Igbo and Benin in Africa, that imposed their culture on other people in Africa, and so on and so forth. So the point that I'm getting at is, I want to say this to my white brothers and sisters out there, is that, when we start talking about colonization, invariably it goes to a discussion of European colonization, and that's not entirely fair, because there's a lot of other colonization that's going on. Matter of fact, let's talk about white on white crime. let's talk about the Viking influence on England and in France.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these were things that happened, and again, like when you start talking about 20th century Germany and their push to try to expand the what was once the Prussian Empire into a united Germany, and start to spread out into in Eastern Europe, and that is actually what set the stage for Hitler and his whole Lebensraum thing.
Mm-hmm.
That the Sudetenland was natively part of Germany, which it wasn't. That was the Roma people, the Hungarian people. There were a lot of Eastern people who, basically Germans moved into these areas. And anyway, long story short, is this is what I want to get at, and Cap, that whenever you start talking about a nationalistic approach, now this nationalistic approach will invariably influence spirituality. And so what I want to do is, I want to, again, try to decouple that, because if you're a Christian, it doesn't mean that you have to adhere to or subscribe to the European version of Christianity. Or if you're a Muslim, and this is the thing, I think that both Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and even Cat Stevens, that they got this, right? That what they did is they became Muslims because the teaching of Muhammad appealed to them, but the nationalistic approach didn't. And so these three men were ultimately able to decouple themselves from the cultural idioms of where the religion was established.
Right.
And I really think that, like, man, and I could really go cat. I could really go deep into this, because even like with Buddhism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Buddhism is largely influenced or informed by Chinese culture, but Buddhism originated in India, and it spread through China and Korea and ultimately Japan. So when you look at people like the late great Tina Turner, who was a I don't think that Tina was ever yoked to a cultural interpretation of Buddhism. She just believed that the teachings of the Buddha, that the chants, that the rituals and things like that, decoupled from the historical and cultural context of it, made her a better person.
Mm.
And so that's what I want to say, is that if for everybody that's watching this, if you have a particular spiritualistic bent, whether it be Christian, whether it be Muslim, whether it be Jewish, whether it be Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever, let's stop and think about what the expression of your faith looks like without any cultural influence, because in this we understand how to decolonize. And so I'm saying all this to say, and this is saying I'm going to stop here, that when we start talking about decolonizing, first of all, let's get away from this whole white people colonize the world kind of thing, and understand that colonization is a much broader topic, maybe another topic for another show. But let's separate the cultural paradigms from the faith paradigms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes me remember. So my last mission trip was into Kenya in 2016 or 2017. And I was really onto this kind of idea. By that time, I was really deconstructing, really looking at. So part of the deconstruction process, it forces you to, probably before you totally deconstruct or whatever, to separate the kernel of faith that you have from the cultural dressings or baggage that comes with it, right? And so one of the things that used to bother me whenever I would go into Africa is how westernized the churches were there. And here's what I mean to help people understand. We would go in there, very much set up like places I spoke were relatively big, so set up like a mega church in a lot of ways, same authority structures and things like that. But everybody was wearing suits and ties, and you would have thought you were in the U.S. with the way they were dressed.
Sure.
And then every once in a while, they would break out in their traditional dress, which was much more colorful. And they would do something that was more traditional to their own music. And there would just be such a life on it. That's the only way I know how to describe it. So it's a bit of a paradox, I guess, because on the one hand, it's like stripping away the cultural aspects of your faith, but yet on the other hand, embracing and going back to their own cultural roots just took things to a different level, if that makes any kind of sense. And I remember the message that I had at that point in time was that, Africa, really the cradle of civilization, but not just the cradle of civilization, but the cradle of ideas. And so I'm still using, at that time, biblical framework, but, Abraham goes down into Egypt. Joseph goes down into Egypt. Moses goes down into Egypt. Jesus goes down into Egypt. And then a lot of the early church fathers were also Egyptians. They were Alexandrians.
Mhm.
And I just challenged them to reclaim their Christian faith as theirs rather than something that they inherited as a result of white missionaries and stuff coming over and trying to box them into that culture with that faith, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Something that was alien to them, something that was foreign to them. So I think if I guess what I would say is, I think spirituality, if it's going to be anything, it has to be authentic. It has to be authentic to who we are as people. And if we resonate more with our roots, then I think culture in that sense is okay, coming from an authentic resonance of this is who I am. You see what I'm saying?
But here's the thing. Let me interject something here.
Sure.
So okay, it's fine that if you say, okay, I have this lens, right? And because I'm an American and I'm Black, so there are certain things that these things make up my experience. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to let my spirituality be informed or influenced by these things. In other words, that I am me. I am the sum total of my experiences, but my spirituality, if I couple my spirituality to some cultural paradigm, then I immediately ascribe some cultural superiority to something based on faith. That's the point that I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I get that. I totally understand what you're saying. You think, though, does it have to be cultural superiority, though? Like, I think one of the problems that we have still coming out of Christianity and especially the version of it that's active today is that we assume sort of we talked about, didn't we talk about quantum computing last week?
Yeah, we did talk about quantum computing. Yes, we did.
The binary on-off sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
I think still traps us. I think that I'm hopeful that we can come into a pluralistic mindset that says mine's really good for me, doesn't make it right for everybody, and certainly doesn't make it better than anybody else's. And that really has been my contention. I'm all over the place. That really has been
that's exactly where I'm going.
Yeah,
I mean, you're in the space, you're in the zone where I wanted to go.
But that's my contention with progressive Christianity, because it still wants to maintain this idea of the Trinity, that Jesus himself, or Christ, or whatever you want to call it, is God, right? Is the same as God, is in the highest seat of dominion and authority or whatever. And so we can say, okay, well, we do away with hell, we embrace universalism and all this stuff, but really to know what God looks like, you have to look at Jesus. There's still a kernel of superiority in that says, okay, all y'all, we'll play with you, we'll let you, we'll let you come over for dinner.
Yeah.
We'll let you into our heaven, but you still got to realize that we got something that you don't have. And that's the problem that I see with Christianity. So they go around, I'm going to piss some people off. A lot of progressive Christians, not everybody, but a lot of progressive voices, a lot of voices in the progressive Christian movement go around pearl clutching and virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Under a guise of we're just, so much more enlightened. I mean, it's like Christian superiority on crack, because we're more enlightened than everybody that's not Christian, but we're also more enlightened than our Christian brethren because they haven't progressed to the point that we are at yet.
Right. And this is something that, okay, so talking about progressive Christianity, I remember one time I was on a weekly Bible study call.
Yeah.
And I'll just hang on for a second. I'm gonna put this in our private chat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I was in a Bible study, and so the pastor who was leading this, he says, well, that Jesus wasn't a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. And immediately there was this blowback from the entire congregation Well, why not? Why not? That's what Jesus looked like. And so again, what to be fair to this particular individual,
Mm-hmm.
he was trying to break a paradigm.
Right.
But his congregation, the people that were paying his bills, came back and said, "No, homie, that's not it. Jesus absolutely was this, and here's why." Now, why is this important? Because
And he read the King James version too, I suppose, right?
yeah, but again, it's like if you say, okay, this is our paradigm. Now what you're doing is you are introducing a cultural superiority,
Right.
right? And that's the part that I'm trying to
That's the colonizing part of it, the decolonizing. So it's not really deculturalizing, it's more decolonizing.
Decolonize. Exactly. Because
Yeah.
here's the thing, you are part of your culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you are a Dane, if you are a Finn, if you are Russian, Italian, English, French, there's nothing wrong with being part of that culture. Where this goes off the rails is when you say, okay, my culture is superior to yours because, and now what you've done is you have effectively colonized your spirituality.
Sure.
So let me get to this, because I promised at the beginning of the show that I was going to throw a bone to my Christian brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And let me say this before I say what I'm going to say, is that this is a boon, a benefit to you as Christians, whether you're white, black, or green. And it's this, that the oldest Christianity in the world is Coptic, that is Ethiopian, Somalian, or Persian. Mm-hmm. These are the oldest flavors of Christianity that exist. Why is this important? Because I have so many friends who are black atheists or agnostics that will come up and say, well, you shouldn't worship this Jesus, or you shouldn't participate in this Christianity because that's a white man's religion. So I'm here to help all of you black and brown folks out here, that Christianity is not a white people's religion. It's not a white people's spirituality. This came from the Middle East, where there were anthropologically no blonde hair, blue-eyed people. And it was spread to the east in Persia and to the west in Ethiopia by non-white people. So the earliest Christianity that exists, and Aaron mentioned this, that people, the early church fathers, Origen, Augustine, Anthemius, that these were all people of color, right? And the fact is, this is not, you're not talking about some white people's religion. This is a religion that began in the land of black and brown people and spread to the land of white people. In other words, if you want to talk about a universal faith that is not colored by culturalism, this is it. Mm-hmm. This is it. And so let me say this while I'm here to my Muslim brothers and sisters, that Islam began in what we call Saudi Arabia and spread first to the east into Persia, and then to the west into East Africa, before it spread into Europe or anywhere else. In other words, and even okay, so like let's talk about our man Sammy Davis Jr., right? Because
Mhm.
Sammy became a Jew. He is a black person that became a Jew. He accepted Judaism. And people say, oh, well, he's just kissing white people's ass. No, that's not the case. Because the actual Hebrew faith, when you talk, can I be real here for a second? That when you talk about Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? And so this is where you get Semitism or anti-Semitism, because it's like Shem, Shem was I think was the middle son. That Japheth was the oldest. That Shem was the middle child, and Ham was the younger, right?
I think that's right.
And the thing is that when you talk about Ham, Shem, and Japheth, you what people try to do is they try to distinguish this ethnically as if two brothers can be two ethnic stripes. That if you are if you are of Shem, you are of Ham. If you are of Ham, you are of Japheth. In other words, you're of the same ethnic stripe, no matter what. What am I getting at? Is that when you start talking about whether someone is anti-Semitic or not as a racist trope, no, that doesn't work, because Ham, Shem, and Japheth are brothers. And I can tell you this, I have two full brothers and sisters, Brian and Michelle, and guess what? We all black. Brian and I are fairly light. Michelle's a little browner. Now, if you stretch that out a little bit further, you get Morris and Sandy. Morris is light, Sandy's a little browner, right? But we're all black.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the whole thing about anti-Semitism as a racist trope doesn't work, because if you're anti-Shem, then you have to be anti-Japheth and anti-Ham as well. And that's the point that I'm getting at. We have to decouple this whole a racial identity of our spirituality, and in order to decouple ourselves from our cultural spiritual identity. Anyway, that I need a drink.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you want to unpack that a little bit more, just because we're in this environment, especially politically right now, where anti-Semitism is really a hot term and a hot button. Potato. Yeah.
Go. Bye. Sorry.
So make it current. Like I get what you're saying about the biblical story, but you could connect it, make it a little bit more current as to what's going on today.
No, and I'm glad you said that, because if you're using Ham, Shem, and Japheth as some racial archetype, right? You cannot have three separate races from the same two parents.
Okay, so you and I are really steeped in this sort of biblical paradigm and know where this comes from, but I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners don't know that this is where a lot of bullshit comes from.
Yeah, a lot of Christian nationalism, and racial identity of Christianity comes from. But keep going, because I like where you're going with this.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, what Derrick's talking about is, this whole thing that happened, and I'm not an expert on this, so I want to be careful how I address this, but with slavery and justifying slavery, justifying especially segregation, all this kind of stuff. So people would learn in their Sunday school lessons, and it'd be preached from their pulpits that
the curse of Ham, Aaron.
Yeah, that God divided humanity racially after the flood through these three sons because of an incident that happened with Noah, and Ham was cursed because he saw his father. I'm not making this shit up, because he saw his father naked
he saw his father's junk.
Yeah, and so he was cursed, and so it was taught that the black race specifically came out of Ham. And so Derrick's kind of going back and addressing that whole thing for people that know about that. So if you don't know anything about that, you're blessed. But this is where we sometimes on this show we're both pretty well studied in theology and stuff like that. So sometimes we unpack stuff that's not maybe the average Christian today doesn't even know existed, but you can study that out for yourself, and how that particular section passage that Derrick is talking about was used to justify all kinds of atrocities throughout history. So anyway,
it's funny. You know what, Aaron? You were pouring a drink exactly at the same time I was.
Yeah, I just
I need a drink.
I'm being mindful. People are saying that Kamala Harris didn't choose Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish, even though she's married to a Jewish man. And
he's married to a Jewish man.
We just want to divide is one political strategy that we see.
So I want to talk about this, right? Because here's the thing: if we can decolonize our spirituality, we can do away with the division, right?
Right.
In other words, so let me say this. I'm going to say this for all of my Christian, Muslim, and Jewish friends, right? That Yahweh is God, is El Shaddai. It's the same God, guys. It's the same God. Now, how we approach this God based on our cultural paradigms that color our spiritual views might make the approach a little bit different, but the God, that person, that being, that archetype is the same. And again, excuse me, this is why decolonizing our faith is so important. Because if we take away the colonization of this, and we say, okay, like I remember one time in my spiritual journey, and matter of fact, this was in Eastern Europe. We had a meeting between Christian bishops, Muslim imams, and Jewish rabbis.
Mm.
And the idea was that, okay, we're all basically from the same family tree. So why are we tripping? Why are we tripping? Mm. And that was basically the thrust of the discussion. But that's what I want to get at, is that, okay, if you say, okay, my spirituality is based on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Or, Junie, don't knock the rice over, please. Take that from her. And then the Jewish version is that that Moses, or that God spoke to Moses in the form of the burning bush and told him to go to Pharaoh and release the Hebrew slaves. And then you have Islam that says that that it wasn't Isaac who was the favored one, but it was Ishmael.
Right.
Okay, but the common denominator in all of these is Yahweh, Allah, whatever you want to call God. So the thing is that at the end of the day, all of these represent a commonality of spirituality. But we don't see that. Why? Because we get caught up in our own cultural lenses, right? You know, the Jewish people have a cultural lens. Christian people have the Western cultural lens. And here's, let me stop here for a second, because I have people that are watching this right now that are saying, well, Derrick, you're just talking about the Western interpretation of Christianity. You're not talking about the Eastern interpretation of it. So you have the Orthodox view, which is,
Still comes out of Europe, by the way. Greek, Russian.
yeah,
Sorry, just had to throw that in there.
it's still European, right? It's just a different part of Europe. And again, what we're doing is we're delineating all of this based on a cultural or racial lens.
Yep.
And so again, I said this at the beginning of the show, and I'll say it again. I'm going to keep banging this drum that if you are subscribing to some form of theology, some form of spirituality, some form of religion, that take a step back from what it is that you believe and say, okay, if you are a Christian and you say, let me see Jesus, and I'm going to say this, and people don't get it twisted. Let me see Jesus naked and bare for what he is. If I'm Muslim, let me see Muhammad naked and bare for what he is. And if I'm a Jew, let me see Moses naked and bare for what he is. In other words, let me see the founding of this without any cultural circumscription, right?
Mhm.
Let me just see it for what it is. And this is the thing, that if you can see it for what it is, okay, let me throw another one out here. For those of you, so I'm going to pick on JD Vance for a minute.
Low hanging fruit.
It's low hanging fruit, but he married an Indian woman, and he had embraced Hinduism. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. If Hinduism is your bag, great, but embrace Hinduism outside of the Hindu nationalist perspective. In other words, I'm going to see the Indian pantheon of gods outside of so, because this is a big thing in India right now, right? You have Modi, who represents the bulk of Hindu nationalists, and these Hindu nationalists, they not only want to see Hinduism as the state religion of India, they want to purge out the Christians, they want to purge out the Muslims, they want to purge out the Buddhists. They want a pure Hindu state. Now, that's the Hindu nationalist perspective, but that is not Hinduism. That's the point. So how do we decouple our respective spirituality from our nationalistic viewpoint?
Mm-hmm.
That's the challenge, Aaron.
It's hard because when we talk about nationalism and we talk about more our religion, maybe it's more so than our spirituality, it's how people identify themselves, right? So people identify themselves in a lot of different ways. They might identify as Christian, American. They might even identify themselves as Republican or as a Democrat, right? These are identities that we take on. And so if the ideology that is connected with the identity is challenged, because we've conflated it so much, we can feel like our like it's a personal attack on us. You see that all the time, right? I mean, it's so funny to me just watching the political scene right now, how people interpret events and messaging completely based on their political bias. Like they are just completely spinning it one way or the other, depending upon where they're at. And it's just amazing to me the loss of objectivity with a lot of people, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it just seems like nobody can objectively stand back at their candidate and say, well, that was really fucking stupid thing to do. You know? Or we can't talk about policy anymore, partly because people conflate political identity as part of themselves, right? We make an identity out of it.
Yep.
And I think it's hard for people to separate their spirituality from their nationality because both are part of what they identify with. So if you grew up in a, you'll see this more in the South, but if you grew up in a, real fundamentalist Baptist or Pentecostal church where they preach from the King James version all the time, and you're baby boomer Gen Xer, right? So what the reason I'm saying that is you didn't have all these translations when you were 8, 9, 10 years old growing up. There was like, I mean, the NIV came around in 1984 or something like that, right? So you're more susceptible to buying into this. The King James only version of the Bible is the right version of the Bible, and it's the inspired version of the Bible. Well, that's complete nonsense, but we can buy into that because of our cultural identity and growing up in those circles, right? Like one of the areas that I remember kind of poking at this, and this was a big thing. I don't know if you saw this, Derrick, like 10, maybe 15 years ago. But there's power in the name of Jesus, right? There's power in the name of Jesus. And I remember saying, okay, there's power in the name of Jesus. Is there power in the name of Jesus?
Yeah.
And then people came around and they're like, no, the power is in Yeshua. You got to say it right. His name was Yeshua. Okay. And they demonized the J. The J came along. I didn't get into all that nonsense.
Yeah, and that's another one.
And then later it was Yahshua. It wasn't Yeshua.
It was Yahshua because Yah had to be part of his name.
Exactly. And there, I guess I'm bringing this up because when you were talking about Muslims, I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure, and my sword is rusty from lack of use and polishing, but I'm pretty sure that in the Aramaic, which we know was the language that Jesus spoke, and even the ancient Aramaic, that when Jesus was praying, Allah would be closer to the term he would be using.
Right.
So imagine taking a bunch of Christian nationalists and throwing them into a theater and doing some kind of remake of the Passion of the Christ, right? Mm-hmm. And have Jesus praying and praying to Allah. And imagine the shit show that's going to create, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm bringing this up as illustrations of how culturalism can become confusing. This thing of separating, it can be confusing for people because so much of their identity can be wrapped up into both nationalism, their national identity, and their religious identity.
So again, this is my take, right? That as I remember when I was a Christian, and someone had approached me with the idea that Jesus was not a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed person.
Right.
Okay. So now I have to take a step back from that and say, okay, how does Jesus speak to me, appear to me, manifest to me outside this paradigm that I've been taught? Because this is how I've expected Jesus to show up to me. And so I had to decolonize my faith. And let me say this to you, to everybody that's watching, right? That deconstruction is a big thing, and I devoted an entire chapter to this in my sequel to deconstructing religion. That if you're not, if you are not deconstructing what Jesus looked like, you're not really deconstructing. You can't be, because there is a model, a paradigm of what Jesus is in the Western idiom. Now, if we say that this is the way it is, okay, let's say I'm going to have a moment. I'm having a moment where Jesus appears to me.
Yep.
And Jesus appears to me, and he looks like Willem Dafoe.
Yep.
Okay. I'm picking a more rugged example, but let's say Chris Helmsworth.
Yeah.
Let's say that he shows up looking like that guy. Am I seeing the real Jesus, or am I seeing an idealized version? Now, and that brings up a whole nother, opens up another can of worms, because if I'm seeing this and I'm saying this is Jesus, can I truly trust what is being said to me? Because if my image is incorrect, could the words also be incorrect? But if I say I'm coming to you, oh, God, okay. Because I got to get into a Christian mindset here. But if I'm saying, Lord, if this is you, I want to hear your voice.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to hear your voice, I need to see your face. Now, if my image is incorrect, can the words be trusted? But if I say, I have no, and this is not something you have to profess or proclaim audibly or even subconsciously, but if you just say, if you come to this, like, and if you guys are watching, my eyes are closed. I haven't opened my eyes as I've said any of this. But if I say, Lord, I trust who you are. I trust who you are. And even if you don't look like what I've been taught you look like, I'm going to hear your voice. Now I'm opening my eyes, because I went through this. Man, God damn. Let me tell you a story real quick. Let me throw this in here.
Yeah, no, this is good. Really good.
I was at a conference in Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
This is before I relocated to Tulsa. But there was a preacher there, a pastor there, who and he was the host. Let me just caveat this with that. And he said, when we all get to heaven, I'm gonna come over on y'all's side and visit. Now, he said that. This is a white pastor that said this to a whole bunch of black pastors. And the sad part is that these black pastors were on board with that statement. he was speaking to a group of colonized black preachers.
Mm.
What am I getting at? That if any one of us were decolonized, and I'm gonna tell you, I think that I was probably the closest to being decolonized at that moment, because I immediately, when he said that, this is my thought, that's some bullshit. That was my first fucking thought.
Yeah, and I know who you're talking about too, because we've talked about this before. Very influential pastor.
And there's a guy on here, Malachi Gross. And I think, I'm not sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that Malachi Gross was there when this happened.
Mm.
We didn't know each other then, but I think he was there. I think he was there. But the point that I'm getting at is that if we are colonized in our spirituality, then that means that we have an idealized version of who Jesus should be, or what God should look like. And the minute that we get that, we now dilute who God is. What if, like I remember one time, Aaron, I got to tell you a story and then I'll shut up, I promise. But one time I had a dream that I was talking to God. And I kid you not, Aaron, that every 3 seconds, roughly, in the dream, that God changed what he looked like. Sometimes it was a she, sometimes it was a he, sometimes it was black, sometimes it was white, sometimes it was Indian, sometimes it was Persian, sometimes it was Chinese, sometimes it was Japanese. But as I'm having this conversation with God, that God is changing.
Yeah.
And that was a seminal point in my life, because now I'm no longer seeing God as this, this white man sitting on the clouds. And I never forget when what is it, William Paul, who's the writer of The Shack?
Paul Young.
William Paul Young. When he shared God as mama, as a black woman, people lost their shit.
They did. Sure did.
But again, that was a result of the colonization of Christianity. And again, what I'm trying to get to in this particular discussion, in this particular context, I'm saying, how do we get past that? How do we get past, how do we shed our colonization, what our preconceived notion about what God is, or what God looks like, or what Jesus is, or what Jesus looks like? How do we get past that? Because this is important. Because if you are not willing to decolonize your theology, that means you're stuck in a space where your expectation is that God has to look like this. And so if there is a God, then that means that God has to be able to speak to you even in a way that you don't necessarily expect it. Anyway.
It's funny, we're like telepathically linked or something, because when you were talking before you shared that story about the dream that you had and God changing forms, I was thinking to myself, I wonder what would have happened if the Gnostic version of Christianity would have perpetuated itself through the generations, rather than the more colonizable version of Orthodox
Dude.
Christianity.
So here's the thing. We are telepathically linked. Because I honestly believe, Aaron, that the Gnostics really, I mean, if you're going to build a faith paradigm, that the Gnostics had it right.
Well, in one of the Gnostic Gospels, I can't remember which one right now, but there is exactly that scenario that you described, almost exactly the same, with one of the disciples after Jesus, ascends or whatever, and they look at the ascension and the crucifixion totally different.
Yep.
But he sees Christ as an old man, an old woman, a child, different ethnicities, and it's morphing.
Yep.
And so for me, I think where I've landed, where I'm comfortable, is this whole idea of sort of that we are all divine. We are all aspects of divinity. Now, whether you want to call that God, whether you want to call that consciousness, whether you want to call it whatever term people are comfortable with,
Yep.
whether you want to call it Christ, I don't care. And that we are incarnate in these bodies, and with that comes all this cultural identity and ego and all this other stuff that comes with it, right? And but at the end of the day, we're all equally divine, and we may not be equal in terms of position in our societies, intellect, physical capabilities, whatever.
Yep.
But we all have that in common, that aspect of divinity that is within us. And I was just thinking, like you got 3 synoptic gospels that basically tell the same story.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the Gospel of John. What would have happened if they would have canonized the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene,
The Gospel of Judas,
and we'll give them Matthew, so you have a good, you know what I mean? So it's very clear to me. And one of the things that played a real important role in my deconstruction was the work of Elaine Pagels. Unless somebody's really a Bible nerd and wants to get in the weeds and have to Google the meaning of several very complicated theological terms, I wouldn't recommend Elaine Pagels unless you have an insomnia problem. But for me at the time,
which I love her, by the way.
Huh?
I love her, by the way.
Yeah, she was really good. Some of her work, The Origin of Satan especially, is a book that she wrote where she really dissects the political environment at the time that Orthodoxy was taking root. And she really dissects the various different political angles in all 4 of the Gospels. And so you really begin to see how politics played a crucial role in the formation of what we know today as Christianity. And it still hasn't divorced. God damn it. They're still bedfellows. So I think, to sum up for me, I appreciate this discussion. It's really a good one. Really made me think about some things. There's so much freedom in this, and this is Freeology Friday, right?
Yep.
So there's so much freedom when you can decolonize your spirituality, when you can separate out the various different cultural aspects that are frankly probably pretty binding upon you in ways that you don't even realize it, and prevent you from a more fully expressed, if not a more pure and genuine form of spiritual expression that you can have in your life. That's what I would say.
And that is really it, Aaron. It's like, how do I get to a point where my spirituality is not colored by my cultural paradigm, right? And this is really key because, again, when we look at like Islam is hyper patriarchal when seen through the lens of Persian and Arabian culture.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at it naked and you say, okay, I'm taking away my understanding of of Islam based on cultural paradigms, you'll see like a lot of female liberation in Islam. The same thing with Judaism or Christianity is that if I take away it, so you and I, we've talked about this in great detail. Like Paul, on the one hand, spoke about Eunice and Lois and Phoebe in their contribution to the spread of the gospel. But then you get to the pastoral epistles, and Paul's like on a totally different thread. I suffer not a woman to teach me.
Yeah.
You know, so which is it, Paul? You know, which is it?
Yeah.
And I would say that if I'm going to choose a winner, I'm going to choose the one that allows the women to have a voice, right? And again, here's for the people that don't mind going off into the weeds, don't mind going down the rabbit hole. That among theologians, there's what they call Paul and pseudo Paul.
Yeah.
And that a lot of what has been ascribed to Paul that is part of the canon of Scripture, that we cannot conclude that it is Paul because he wrote from a prior paradigm that is contrary to what so like the Pauline pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, those could not possibly have been written by Paul. So again, it's like, okay, if you look at the Pauline epistles and you say, okay, based on what I read, coupled with what you know, so again, you have to go back, and this is a paradigm that holds true scripturally, is the law of first mention. The law of first mention is a powerful rubric for interpreting scripture. Because if it has been mentioned this way once, anytime that it veers from that, then that means that there's something that there's extra scriptural. It doesn't line up. So I would encourage you, listener, watcher, viewer, reader, to go down some rabbit holes with this and see what was said at the beginning versus what was said at the end. And do these things make sense? And if they don't, then you have to say, okay, this is something that it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then you have two choices of how to deal with it. One is you could just disregard it, which that's my personal take on it, or you can shelve it. You can put it on the shelf, table it for another discussion, table it for another interpretation, another round of scrutiny. But you can't just accept it at face value. That's what you can't.
Correct.
So anyway, that's my take on it, Aaron. Your mileage may vary.
I love it. Paul and pseudo Paul wasn't on my bingo card for tonight, but I love it.
Well, you know,
really good in depth. I love it.
I have to give a shout out to our friend Keith Giles, because Keith is the one that originally introduced me to the Paul versus pseudo Paul discussion.
All right. So look at a few comments you want to, or what do you want to do?
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Yeah. Tommy says, man, so many thoughts in my head. Great discussion. Thanks, Tommy. Shannon says it was never about men and women, rather masculine and feminine principles. Oh, so both Tommy and Shannon like Elaine Pagels. So good for you guys. We're on the same page there. Let's see. I saw a question from Shannon. Let's see if I can find it. So this seems to be in the context of when we were talking about the curse of Ham and all that stuff. And she says, answer this. How did it spread? I'm not really sure, Shannon, what the it is there. Sorry to be coming back to it so late, but
No, I think she was talking about how did Christianity spread the way that it did. And Shannon, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Colonization.
But she said decolonization is a huge part of deconstruction, and that is,
yeah, it is.
I mean, let me say this about deconstruction, because deconstruction frustrates me on a lot of different levels, because you have these people that deconstruction is a way of life, and so it's like you're in a constant state of deconstruction, and I don't believe that. Let me say it like this, from an engineering standpoint. If you deconstruct a jet engine, once you've deconstructed it all to its disparate, discrete parts, the engine is fully deconstructed. Now, at this point, it's incumbent upon you to put this thing back together again in such a way that you understand how it works going forward. And when we talk about deconstruction, people are talking about consistently peeling back layers of the onion, and at some point you reach an elemental dissection of the thing. And once it's elementally dissected, there are no more. I mean, it's like now we start talking about quantum stuff, and we talk about deconstructing the atom, right? But spirituality is not like that. Once you get down to the atomic level, that's it. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's like a quantum discussion around spirituality. In other words, now we're going to, we're going to, deconstruct this and deconstruct this further, and we're going to keep splitting the hair until I just don't see it. At some point, you get down to the elemental component of it, and you say, okay, can I reconstruct this based on what I have?
Yeah. Tommy just posted a question I want to address. It says, this isn't a rhetorical question, but I wonder if you decouple a religion from its native context in which it was created, is it still that religion, or are you just making something else?
Ooh, good question.
Really, really, really great question. And I want to encapsulate where I'm at right now. I mean, when you were talking, Derrick, about, and this isn't going to seem like it relates to your question, Tommy, but I think if you hang with me, you'll see that it does. When you were talking about the white Jesus thing and closing your eyes and saying, okay, however you are, I want to open my eyes. I want to see you, that part of the discussion. And, if Jesus is appearing to me as white Jesus, can I trust what I'm hearing? So I tend to look at this in a very, I guess, nuanced way, in that there are layers to this, because when you were talking about that, I had a number. I mean, my experience in Christianity was very experiential, and it was very visionary. I had many encounters, even when I wasn't seeking them. I would have encounters that were they were visions. So I assumed they were in my head, taking place in my head, right? I wasn't under the delusion that Jesus was standing in the room with me or anything like that. I knew it was an internal process that was happening. And in almost every case, there were a few exceptions, but in almost every case, it was the Jesus I saw in the pictures of my Methodist church when I was growing up, right? And yet there was definitely undeniable things that were imparted to me in those encounters, I would say. And for whatever reason, I have just always felt connected to something. Whether you want to call it universal mind, source, God, Christ, whatever you want to call it, consciousness. I've always felt connected to this, and I can connect into it virtually at will. I can't share that because that would be encroaching on a session that I just had. And so if someone were to watch it, I don't want to do that. But I've had a number of sessions with people from different religious perspectives where I can connect into that source, power, energy, whatever you want to call it, and release something powerful that impacts their lives in a positive way. I remember being at a New Age conference many years ago when I was starting to get into that. So we're talking probably 2018. It was before the pandemic, probably 2017, 2018. And doing sort of New Age energy work, and we're practicing, and I placed my hands on this individual, and immediately his whole life is laid out in front of me. And so I start telling him about events and various different things, all happening in knowledge. And the white Jesus that I was used to connecting with, right, shows up, and he says, my spirit guide is here, and my spirit guide is Yeshua, right?
Yeah.
So I've just always felt connected to this energy, this source of information and downloads, and I've tried my best throughout my life to always use that in an ethical way and in a way that promotes other people and helps other people. And yet I can recognize that the white Jesus is a representation, but also a distortion, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In other words, all language is distorted on some level, right? So if I close my eyes and all of a sudden, white Jesus appears to me, then that's my way of sort of connecting or plugging, or was, not so much today. That's my way of plugging into it, right? But do I believe Jesus was white? No, I don't. Absolutely. In fact, I know
this goes back to something
he wasn't, right? But let me just finish real quick, Derrick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there has to be a mindfulness that, yes, we're receiving messages in this kind of paradigm, we're receiving energy and stuff like that, but we also still have to be aware that we are on some level probably projecting our life experience, confirmation biases, cultural experience, things like that. And I think as long as you're aware of that, then I think that it's okay. So long way of answering Tommy's question, I think the core message of a religion can still impact people in various different iterations of culture and still be positive.
Yep. I agree with that. I want to take you back to a teaching you did, I don't know, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Where Jesus was an egregore.
Yeah.
And I think that when we look at what an egregore is, Dina, really? What is an egregore, and what does that represent to us? Right? And I think that a lot of times we define our own egregores based on our own cultural paradigms. In other words, if we say egregore, an angelic being, right? So, okay, so what does this angelic being look like? How is that? No one tells us what this looks like.
Right.
We're left to our own devices as to how to define that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
hey, Tommy comments. He says, "Take my comment down. You're making it look like I'm saying Aaron is saying bullshit." I don't understand that at all. I'm not tracking with that. Do you understand?
No, that's not what we're saying, Tommy. No, I took the comment down, but no, I don't think that you're saying what Aaron is saying is bullshit.
Okay. Yeah. No, I thought it was a great question.
Yeah, it was.
And that's just my personal opinion from my personal experience on that, for sure.
Yeah, I think this was a good conversation, a good discussion. And again, I want to say this from the standpoint of deconstruction.
Oh, wait, hold on. Tommy says I was just kidding. Okay, Tommy, I'm going to confess my sins. I'm going to confess my sins. I am fighting old age with all that I have within me. People can call it a second midlife crisis. I don't give a fuck what they call it. And so I cannot see what that emoji is.
Okay, so let me say one thing.
I cannot see the emoji next to Tommy's comment because I need probably reading glasses. So there's my confession.
Okay, so basically the emoji next to Tommy's comment is like the rolling emoji, right? The rolling laughing emoji.
I kind of figured when he said.
No, so let me say this is that when we start talking about we start talking about spirituality, and we start talking about our viewpoint on this. I don't think that anybody's perspective is bullshit. That's the and so let me say this too, is that I actually got to experience Aaron in the flesh 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he's a lot fucking younger than I am. So I'm not gonna leave him out there, to the old age. Oh fuck, I'm just old.
Well, I know I need to get like trifocals or bifocals, but I'm just like putting it off.
I'm not gonna let you fall on that sword, man. You're okay. You're compared to me, you're a youngin. So John Hudson says, "Fight aging." This shit sucks. I'm sure it beats the alternative. Yeah, it does. If you think about it, the alternative being death, yeah, this beats the fuck out of death.
My dad used to say that all the time. Getting older, well, it sure beats the alternative. He would say that all the time.
Hey, you know what? I have several of my friends who are morticians. They're undertakers, right? And they would say they'll say things like, every day on the right side of the dirt is a good day. Or they'll say something like, yeah, it's better to be seen than to be viewed. And I don't know. I love Undertaker humor. So Roman Lofton, I love you guys.
Yeah. Let me say this about Derrick. Meeting Derrick in person, he has a presence, but it's a very gentle presence, not weak. Nobody's going to mistake your kindness for weakness, but you have a presence, an energy about you that just puts people at ease, disarms people. So when you see, when people see your posts, they don't see the person behind the posts. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in there. Like you definitely light up a room when you walk in, for sure.
I could say the same thing about you. It was like when I came to pick you up from the airport, I was like, wow. It's like this dude, he stands out, And let me say this to everybody that's out there, right? That I'm going to use some more Undertaker humor, right? that it's better to be outstanding than undertaken. So you should always strive to be outstanding.
Yeah.
Don't let shit bury you. You
Yeah.
know, be the best that you can be. Um, you know, stand above the crowd. Um, and again, it was like this is so funny because I remember when I pulled up to the Dallas airport,
Yeah.
I knew exactly who you were. I knew exactly who you were. Never seen you in real life before, and you had on a hat and sunglasses, but
Yeah, I
I
did.
knew exactly who
Yeah,
you
I looked like a tourist for sure, man.
were.
Yeah, I was lucky, so lucky to make it. Like everything that could possibly go wrong to try to make me miss that flight happened to me. Um, everything from road delays to traffic jams to getting stuck at security for some god who knows why reason, and then rushing off from security because I'm in a hurry and forgetting my carry on and then having to go back. It's bad, man. But I was glad I made it. I was so glad I made it.
I'm glad you did too. And dude, you gave us a teachable moment at the altar, which that is absolutely awesome.
I felt like I fumbled it, but I'm glad you appreciated it. It was an honor to me, and I got emotional. I did. I got choked up because I did. I just my soul was in it. Really was.
Oh, dude, you were there. You know, it's like everybody brought some energy
For
to the wedding ceremony, and it was just and it was awesome. And just for you being there, probably what was the most awesome moment in my life, dude. I can't thank you enough. I
sure.
just
My pleasure. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every bit of it. I enjoyed your family. I enjoyed Maya's family. I enjoyed all of it.
well, I got to tell you something. Like I'm sitting in this kitchen right now, right? And it was during that time when we were up there. What were we doing? Putting batteries in candles,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And Aaron became an official Negro. I mean, it was like my family and friends just so embraced Aaron, and and it was just amazing. It was amazing. I mean, you know, it was like my brother, you know, Maya's friends and family. Aaron, you are part of us,
I
man.
got to tell you, I don't know if I told you this, but we were joking around about buying, the Walmart experience, right?
Uh-huh.
And we had to get a ton of zip ties, and we're getting zip ties. And I'll be honest, mostly my frame of reference for zip ties is like handcuffs, right? That's
Yeah,
what I think
yeah,
of. That's
yeah,
where my mind goes.
yeah.
And so we're joking around about that and stuff, and joking around about bodies and body bags, and we're loading up the U-Haul, right? And I come back in the house, and your brother Brian, and I can't even remember because I'd had too much. What was that stuff we got? Uh,
Were you drinking Uncle Nearest
Uncle
at that
Nearest,
time?
yeah,
Yeah.
combined with the beer and everything else I'd had at the pizza party, whatever. And so I walk in, and they're talking about hog tying somebody. Just walk in the middle. There's a hog tying, and I'm like, okay, let me just ask this question. I said, I'm the only white dude here, and the fact that you have zip ties and now you're talking about hog tying, should I be worried?
No, dude.
And bro, no, they pounced on that like you would not believe.
Oh my God. It was like
They pounced on that.
it was the joke that wouldn't die.
Oh, it was terrible. Oh.
Yeah, but
Anyway, it
dude,
was great, man. I loved it. Loved every minute of it.
you fit right in. But dude, you were part of the family, and I'm just eternally grateful for you being here,
Yeah,
dude. That meant everything to me.
nah, it was good times, man. Thank you for letting me be part of it. I was honored. All right, I guess we should end this love fest. And
Yes, sir.
thanks everybody for commenting and your questions. And
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
yes, yes, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, indeed. And you know what? Next week is my 62nd birthday.
No shit.
Yeah.
No way.
So it's gonna be on and popping.
Sounds great. Yeah, that's right. Your August birthday.
Speaking of that, while we're talking about birthdays, my
Mhm.
cousin Tanya, who I got to see last weekend, because her daughter Blake went to UT, is going to UT for grad school. So I got a chance to spend time with Tanya, and Tanya is an amazing human being. She will never be on social media like this, but today is her birthday. And I'm not going to say how old she is, but today is Tanya Stoudemire's birthday. So happy birthday, Tanya. I love you with my whole heart. And that's
All right.
it.
Peace.
And hair grease. Love you, man.